Lesson 3. The Prophet's Sunnah as Islamic Proof or Hujjah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma akhrijna min zulumatil wahm wakrimna binuril fahm. Allahumma aftah alayna abwaba rahmatik wanshur alayna khazaina ulumik برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Welcome to Lesson 3, the Prophet's Sunnah as Islamic Proof or Hujjah of Module 1 on an overview of the sciences of Hadith of the course AIS 2136 or Hadith 1. In the previous lesson about the main classifications of Hadith, we have learned that mutawatir is derived from the root word tawatur, and it means sequence or succession and successive coming of a thing. And technically it means a hadith whose narrators in every generation or level of the chain of transmission or sanad are so many that it is generally impossible for them to fabricate it. We have also learned that mutawatir can be classified into two: mutawatir by wording, mutawatir lafzi, and mutawatir by meaning, or mutawatir ma'nawi. We have also learned that aside from mutawatir as a way of classifying hadith on the basis of the number of narrators, we have solitary tradition or hadith, ahad or wahid, and it refers to the tradition whose number of narrators in all or one of the levels of the chain has not attained multiple successive transmission or tawatur. We have also learned that according to the Sunni Muhaddithun, authentic or Sahih tradition refers to the tradition that has three existential or affirmative conditions and two non-existential or negative conditions. The affirmative conditions are: 1. Unbroken chain of transmission or sanad; 2. Veracity or adala of the narrators; and 3. Retentiveness or dhabit of the narrators. While the negative conditions are: 1. The tradition being not unusual or shadh, and number 2, the tradition's lack of defect. We have also learned that according to the Sunni Muhaddithun, good or Hasan tradition refers to the tradition that possesses all the conditions of being Sahih except that one or some of the narrators do not have the necessary retentiveness of memory, and technically they are quote-unquote slightly retentive, or what we call khafiful dhabit. And the last but not least, we have also learned that weak or da'if tradition refers to the tradition in which the label authentic or sahih, good or hasan, or dependable or muwathaq cannot be applied. In other words, any tradition whose chain of transmission is broken or its narrators do not possess the attribute of veracity is considered weak or da'if. So in this lesson, we will take the Prophet's Sunnah as Islamic proof or hujjah. If you can recall, in lesson 1, we have dealt with the position of the hadith in the study of religion, and we arrive at the conclusion that the Sunnah of the Prophet is the second source of the religion that is next to the Quran. And in building the evidence for this, we have actually two types of evidence. One is rational evidence and the other one is textual evidence. The first is aqlī or rational, and the other one is naqlī or textual evidence or dalil. And this textual evidence is further divided into three, meaning textual evidence from the Quran, from the consensus of the Muslim schools of thought, and the Muslims' mental attitude as a whole. And as far as textual evidence from the Quran is concerned, it is further divided into the following: the Prophet's judicial authority, obedience to the Prophet as tantamount to obedience to God, the Prophet as exemplary model or uswatun hasana, and the need for referring to all teachings of the Prophet. Let us deal with them one by one. First, we have the rational evidence. The evidence that is aqlī or rational evidence or dalil. The philosophy behind the missions or bi'that of the prophets is the guidance and training of humanity, putting an end to differences and the establishment of a social order. And these objectives can only be realized with the infallibility or ismat of the prophets. And their total infallibility, in a sense, means that their sayings and actions constitute an Islamic proof. How about textual evidence, or what we call naqlī? First, we have the Quran, as we have mentioned, consensus or ijmā, and the Muslims' mental attitude. So let us first deal with textual evidence from the Quran. The first is the Prophet's judicial authority. In this regard, the next one is obedience to the Prophet as tantamount to obedience to God, the Prophet as exemplary model, and the need for referring to all teachings of the Prophet. Now, let us proceed on item 2.1.1. The need for unconditional acceptance of the Prophet's judgments implies authoritativeness of his sayings, because there is no sense of asking for unconditional acceptance unless his sayings are authoritative. As explained in the philosophy behind apostleship or risālah, one of the Prophet's responsibilities is adjudication and putting an end to disputes and differences. For example, we read, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, كان الناس أمة واحدة فبعث الله النبيين مبشرين ومنذرين وأنزل معهم الكتاب بالحق ليحكم بين الناس فيما اختلفوا فيه. Mankind were a single community. Then Allah sent the prophets as bearers of good news and as warners, and He sent down with them the book with the truth, that it may judge between the people concerning about which they differ. Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 213. The Quran praises the faithful who, when summoned to the Prophet for his judgment, faithfully listened and obeyed him and sincerely submitted to his judgment. We read, for example, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, إنما كان قول المؤمنين إذا دعوا إلى الله ورسوله ليحكم بينهم أن يقولوا سمعنا وأطعنا أولئك هم المفلحون. All the response of the faithful when they are summoned to Allah and His Apostle that He may judge between them is to say, Sami'na wa ata'na. We hear and obey. And they are the felicitous. Surah An-Nur, chapter 24, verse 51. In another place, it reminds the believing men and women that after the Prophet's passing of decree, they do not have any right to have any say on the matter or ask for reconsideration. There is no whys and buts and ifs. We read, for example, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, وَمَا كَانَ لِمُؤْمِنٍ وَلَا مُؤْمِنَةٍ إِذَا قَضَى اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ أَمْرًا أَن يَكُونَ لَهُمُ الْخِيَارَةُ مِنْ أَمْرِهِمْ. A faithful man or woman may not, when Allah and His Apostle have decided on a matter, have any option in their matter. Suratul Ahzab, chapter 33, verse 36. In yet another place, it has gone a step further, stating that the sign of faith is for the believers to take the Prophet as their adjudicator in disputes and to totally submit to his judgment and to entertain and not to entertain any dissension in their hearts, even in their hearts. We read, for example, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ حَتَّى يُحَكِّمُوكَ فيما شجر بينهم ثم لا يجدوا في أنفسهم حرجا مما قضيت ويسلموا تسليما. But know by your Lord they will not believe. They will not believe until they make you a judge in their disputes, and then do not find within their hearts any dissent to your verdict and submit in full submission. Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 65. God swearing to Himself to explain such a level of faith is so elegant and worthy, as you can observe. The message of this verse is the Muslim's total submission in intention, words, and actions to the Prophet. That is point 1. Let us proceed to point 2. Obedience to the Prophet as tantamount to obedience to God. In some Quranic verses, obedience to the Prophet has been treated as equal to obedience to Allah Ta'ala. We read, for example, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, مَن يُطِعِ الرَّسُولَ فَقَدْ أَطَاعَ اللَّهَ. Whoever obeys the Apostle certainly obeys Allah. Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 80. In other verses, moreover, after commanding the faithful to obey Allah, they are also commanded to obey the Prophet. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasul. O you who have faith, obey Allah and obey the Apostle. Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 59. In yet another set of verses, opposition to the Prophet has been put forth along with opposition to God. For example, it is thus stated, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, وَمَنْ يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فَقَدْ ضَلَّ ضَلَالًا مُبِينًا. Whoever disobeys Allah and His Apostle has certainly strayed into manifest error. Suratul Ahzab, verse 33, chapter 33, verse 36. In other verses, going ahead of the prophet, which is tantamount to going ahead of Allah, has been condemned. We read, for example, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la tuqaddimu bayna yadayillahi wa rasulih. O you who have faith, do not venture ahead of Allah and His Apostle. Suratul Hujurat, chapter 49, verse 1. As you can see, it is interesting to note that nowhere in these verses that the necessity for obeying the Prophet or the absence of opposition to him is not limited to restricted to any other thing. Just as obedience to God has been stated as absolute and universal, absolute obedience to the Prophet has also been emphasized. This point bespeaks of the absolute infallibility of the Prophet and the perfect conformity of his actions and words with the divine will. For instance, the verse below reflects the negation of his speaking by his own desire. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. He does not speak out of his own desire. It is just a revelation that is revealed to him. Suratul Najm, chapter 53, verses 3 and 4. This verse, as you may notice, throws out an interesting and instructive equation. For in this case, it seems that the verse must be read as follows. Say, if you love Allah, then follow me. This is because the sign of true love is obedience and union. But instead of saying that obedience to God is the sign of the truthfulness of the claim of loving Allah, obedience to the Prophet is mentioned instead as the criterion. I am referring to this verse of the Quran. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهُ. Say, if you love Allah, then follow me. Allah will love you. Surah to Ali Imran, chapter 3, verse 31. This verse is the best evidence to show that God has regarded obedience to the Prophet as exactly the same with obedience to him. And this is not surprising because the Prophet leads the people to the straight path, which is the divine way. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Innaka latahdi ila siratim mustaqim, siratillah. And indeed, you guide to a straight path, that is the path of Allah Ta'ala. Surah Shura, chapter 42, verses 52 and 53. So let us proceed to point 3. The Prophet as exemplary model or uswatun hasana. The need for taking the action and sayings of the Prophet as the absolute model means there being an Islamic proof. We read, for example, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. In the Apostle of Allah, there is certainly for you a good example. Suratul Ahzab, chapter 33, verse 21. Let us proceed to point 4. That is the need for referring to all teachings of the Prophet. The command to abide by the Prophet's decrees or awamir and prohibitions, nawahi, implies there being unconditional authority. We read, for example, in the Qur'an, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, وَمَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوا وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ شَدِيدُ الْعِقَابِ. Take whatever the apostle gives you and relinquish whatever he forbids you, and be wary of Allah. Indeed, Allah is severe in retribution. Suratul Hashr, chapter 59, verse 7. The explicitness of this verse is worth considering for many reasons. 1. On account of the comprehensiveness of the meaning, the phrase "take whatever the apostle gives you" includes anything that comes from him: action, saying, tacit approval, and write-up. Number 2. Along with the command to resort to and act upon the Prophet's injunctions, refraining from his prohibitions is also prohibited. وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ فَانْتَهُوا. Whatever he prohibited, you relinquish it. That is, acting upon the commands and refraining from the prohibitions are given at the same time, of the same weight. Number 3. The use of the word apostle, Rasul, shows that this total obedience and submission is not on account of the Prophet's personality, but rather on account of his apostleship, or risālah, and designation as such by Allah Ta'ala. Number 4. The admission to God wariness, or taqwa, and warning of the severe punishment of Allah Ta'ala, as you can observe in the last part of the verse. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ شَدِيدُ الْعِقَابِ. This bespeak of the credibility of the Prophet's Sunnah and its mutual relationship with taqwa, or God wariness. Let us proceed to number 2, textual evidence, that is consensus or ijmā. There is a consensus of opinion of all Muslim schools of thought on the Prophet's Sunnah being an Islamic proof. And there is no difference on the fact that when all Muslims and thinkers of the different Muslim schools of thought, or madhahib, agree on a certain matter in spite of all the various differences and tendencies, such a consensus is certainly an authoritative basis. For example, the unanimity of all Muslims on the principle of the unity of God, that is Tawheed, and the obligatory nature of the ritual prayer, the Salat, bespeaks of their decisiveness. Fortunately, the Prophet's Sunnah is one of the references on whose credibility and authority as the second source of religion next to the Quran all Muslims and thinkers of various schools of thought. And the last example, or the last classification of textual evidence, is the Muslim's mental attitude. The Muslims' continuous referral throughout the centuries to the Prophet's Sunnah indicates their mental acceptance of his Sunnah as an Islamic proof. From day one, the companions or Sahaba have learned the method of performing ritual prayers or Salat and the Hajj rituals from the practical Sunnah of the Prophet after listening to his injunctions. Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. Pray as you have seen me praying. In another instance, the Prophet said, Khudhu anni manasikakum. Learn your rites from me. So, from these sayings, we can say that the Sahaba learned the method of performing ritual prayer and Hajj pilgrimage from the practical Sunnah of the Prophet. And even after the passing away of the Prophet, the companions or Sahaba, the followers or Tabi'un, and followers of the followers, Atba'ut Tabi'un, had been always in pursuit of his narrations. And when schools of jurisprudence or fiqh and scholastic theology or kalam emerged, each of them would strive hard to substantiate its beliefs with the Prophet's Sunnah. Finally, the recording of the Sunnah in hundreds of millions, or in hundreds of minor and major writings, and the citation of the Sunnah by all thinkers in their writings in different branches of Islamic sciences, whether it is exegesis or tafsir, jurisprudence or fiqh, scholastic theology or kalam, philosophy or falsafa, ethics or akhlaq, mysticism or irfan, history or tarikh, and other sciences, speak about their practical conduct in referring to the Sunnah and naturally in considering it credible and finding. So to reiterate, when we talk about the Prophet's Sunnah as Islamic proof or hujjah, we have the following evidence or the following pieces of evidence. We have the rational evidence, the dalil that is aqlī in nature, and the other one is naqlī or textual. And textual evidence is further classified into textual evidence from the Quran, from this consensus or ijmā of the Muslim scholars from the first century up to the present, the Muslims' mental attitude. And the textual evidence from the Quran are further classified into the following: the Prophet's judicial authority, obedience to him as tantamount to obedience to God, the Prophet as exemplary model or uswatun hasana, the need for referring to all teachings of the Prophet. And next lesson, we will deal with the views of the Sahaba and Tabi'un, or the companions and the followers, or the next generation to the companions. So for more similar lessons, subscribe to Wayfaring with Mansoor channel. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.